Okay, let's unpack this.
Hmm.
Today we're taking a deep dive into, well, a really fascinating and often complex picture. The current state of quality of life and sustainability in the Czech Republic.
Right.
Our main source, this very comprehensive report on the quality of life and its sustainability year 2030,
Uh-huh.
plus some really insightful regional economic data and property market analysis.
Yeah.
Together, they paint a pretty compelling portrait of a nation that's, well, clearly in flux.
And what's truly fascinating here, I think, is how the Czech Republic is navigating its ambitious 2030 goals.
Hmm.
We're going to uncover where they've made some, significant strides, and equally important, where these deep-seated challenges persist.
Right.
This deep dive offers you a real shortcut, really, to understanding the country's unique developmental story beyond just the headlines.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
So our mission today is to distill the most important nuggets of knowledge from these detailed sources.
Mm.
We want to give you a clear, engaging, and genuinely well-informed perspective on the Czech Republic's journey, covering everything from its economic shifts, its social fabric, and, of course, its environmental ambitions.
Sounds good.
So let's kick things off with the big picture, the Czech Republic's core economic model.
Okay.
The CR 2030 report highlights what feels like a crucial turning point. It states that their traditional growth, heavily based on direct foreign investment, has hit the buffers,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to the labor market. What exactly does that mean for them?
It's a critical moment, really. What it implies is that the country urgently needs to find new engines for growth.
Right.
They've relied heavily on foreign investment for a long time, and while that's been beneficial in many ways, it's now reaching its limits,
Okay.
especially in terms of creating new jobs or stimulating further economic expansion without that external input.
So the focus needs to change.
Exactly. The focus now really has to shift towards fostering innovation, particularly within their small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs.
The smaller businesses.
Yeah, those are the businesses with often the highest potential for dynamic growth. But at the same time, they can't neglect maintaining the competitiveness of the larger established firms, which, still make up the bulk of their economy.
So it's a pivot then from relying on external capital to maybe internal ingenuity.
That's a good way to put it.
And the report also talks about decoupling growth from resource consumption.
Exactly. That's a key objective for 2030, to fundamentally decouple economic growth from the consumption of resources and energy.
Mm-hmm.
And here's an interesting paradox. Even during the COVID-19 crisis, the importance of large companies and those under foreign control actually increased in areas like R&D and innovation.
Really?
Yeah.
Ah.
Yet the outflow of profits abroad, especially dividends, didn't decrease.
Oh.
So while these large firms are vital for R&D, a significant chunk of their earnings is still leaving the country.
I see.
And this challenge is compounded because the Czech economy still grapples with higher material emission and energy intensity compared to many of its peers,
Right.
which basically makes decarbonization not just an environmental goal, but a major overhaul of their entire industrial backbone. It's a huge task.
That economic ambition clearly impacts their broader long-term vision. Speaking of those overarching goals, how are they actually doing against their global sustainability commitments, the SDGs?
Broadly speaking, the Czech Republic has made, pretty good progress. They've successfully advanced in about half of the global SDG targets.
Okay, that's not bad.
It's not bad, but, and this is a significant but, they've shown insufficient activity in 8 specific SDGs.
8, okay.
Yeah. And the report identifies their largest reserves, basically, the areas where they need to do the most work in gender equality.
Gender equality, interesting.
Mm-hmm. And this broader effort to meet sustainability goals is also set against a backdrop of somewhat low public confidence in state representative bodies.
Right.
For instance, trust in the Chamber of Deputies, their lower house of parliament, has kind of hovered between 30% and 40% since 2015.
Well, that's quite low.
It is. So they're working on these big goals with potentially less public buy-in than they might ideally wish for.
We've talked about the broader economic and social shifts, but for most people, the daily reality often comes down to the basics, like their job and their home. Sure. So let's dive into that human element. What does the report say about the labor market and personal incomes? Is life getting, easier for the average Czech citizen?
Well, there's certainly some good news on the income front. Both average and median wages have consistently risen each year over the last 7 years,
Okay.
which is a strong positive trend for households, definitely.
Jobs. Unemployment.
Well, when it comes to unemployment, the country is actually exceeding its targets, which is quite impressive.
Really?
Yeah. For instance, for those with primary school education, ISEED levels, 0 to 2 unemployment was just over 10% in late 2019. That's remarkably well below their nearly 19% target.
Big difference.
Huge difference. And for younger workers, those aged 15-24, unemployment was around 5% in late 2019, significantly better than their 12% target.
So finding work isn't the main issue then?
Broadly, no. Jobs and incomes are looking pretty solid based on these figures.
Yeah, that's very positive for individuals. Beyond the economic shifts, I understand the country is also seeing some significant demographic changes. What are the key trends the report highlights, and how are they impacting society and the workforce?
Indeed. The Czech Republic is experiencing a notable influx of people. In 2019, almost 66,000 individuals arrived.
Wow.
Which was the highest number they'd seen since 2009.
Okay. Where are people coming from mainly?
The most frequent citizens migrating were from Ukraine. That was over 22,000 in 2019, followed by Slovakia and Russia.
Right.
And when we look at foreigners who have registered residence, Ukrainians again lead the pack, then Slovaks, Vietnamese, and Russians.
So the policy is encouraging this.
Well, the official policy aims to attract qualified foreigners and strengthen workforce diversity, which makes sense given their low unemployment figures.
Sure.
But this raises an important question that the report flags. Issues like increasing robotization in the workplace, how to tax it, its potential impact on the labor market. These things are not currently being addressed or analyzed in professional or political discussions.
That seems like a blind spot.
It feels like one, yeah. It's a looming challenge that could really shape future employment if it's not proactively managed.
That's a crucial point, especially considering how fast technology is moving. Shifting gears a bit, what does the report tell us about social inequalities more broadly? Are they making progress there?
Well, it's a bit mixed. On the one hand, income inequality in the Czech Republic is one of the lowest in the EU.
That's great news.
It really is. Fantastic for overall social cohesion. But progress on gender wage differences is described as slightly and very slowly decreasing.
Okay. So moving, but barely.
Moving at a snail's pace, yeah.
Right.
The report also highlights persistent problems in harmonizing personal and work life, especially for women.
Right.
And their representation in decision-making positions is still very low.
How low?
Well, to give you some context, at the time of the report, only 4 out of 13 government members were women, less than 15% in the Senate, and about 22% in the Chamber of Deputies.
That's quite a gap.
It indicates a significant gap in gender equality at the top tiers of power, yes.
So progress is slow on the gender front, despite lower overall income inequality. We've talked jobs, social equity, but for many, the daily reality comes down to the roof over their heads.
Absolutely. Housing.
So let's turn our attention to housing. What's the picture looking like for affordability and access? Is it tough?
Oh, it's a major challenge, particularly in the big cities. Housing affordability is lowest in Prague, Brno, and their surrounding municipalities. No surprise there, maybe.
Right, the main hubs.
Exactly. And property prices have seen a marked rise, significantly influenced by credit financing, which has even led to what the report calls potential overpricing.
A bubble, or heading that way.
Potential overpricing is the term they use. And what's truly striking is how minimal state support for housing seems to be.
Minimal how?
Well, in 2019, state contributions amounted to only about 1% of the total volume of mortgage loans granted that year. Just 1%.
Wow, that's tiny.
It is. And to put that in perspective, there was this program offering advantageous loans for young families under 36 with kids,
Yeah.
It supported less than 300 families in 2018, less than 300. This was despite an enormous overhang of applicants wanting those loans.
So huge demand, tiny support.
Exactly. It really highlights how little the state seems to be doing to directly alleviate the housing crunch, especially for younger people starting out.
Wow, that's a really striking figure. It makes you wonder how that plays out for families trying to make ends meet. But despite these housing challenges, I understand there has been some significant support for families in other areas.
That's absolutely right, and it's a strong positive note, definitely.
Okay, like what?
Well, the total parental allowance, for example, was increased quite significantly from 220,000 Czech koruna to 300,000.
That's a big jump.
It is, and even more for twins or multiple births. That started in January 2020, so it's a real boost for new parents.
Good. Anything else?
Yeah. They also introduced a paternity benefit back in 2018. It offers 1 week of paid leave for fathers during the postpartum period.
Helping equalize things a bit.
Exactly. And since June 2018, long-term care allowances have been available. That provides up to 3 months of leave to care for a relative, covering 60% of their average daily earnings.
That must ease the financial burden.
It really helps, yeah. And on top of that, grants supporting non-state, nonprofit organizations that focus on family support saw a really notable increase from about 23.5 million koruna to 120 million in 2020.
Okay, so a clear commitment there.
Demonstrates a clear commitment to supporting families in diverse ways, yes.
That's a strong positive, particularly the parental allowance increase. But given the persistent housing affordability challenges we just talked about, are these family supports enough to truly offset that high cost of living, especially for young families in cities like Prague? It seems like a complex balancing act.
It absolutely is a balancing act, and it's really a question of magnitude, isn't it?
Right.
While these family benefits are undeniably positive and provide crucial relief, the sheer scale of the housing affordability crisis, particularly in those urban centers, means they likely don't fully offset the enormous financial pressure on young families. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a deeper wound.
Helpful, but not fixing the root cause.
Exactly. Helpful, but not a cure for the systemic issue of housing supply and cost.
That's a really insightful way to put it. Now let's shift our focus a bit to the environment.
Okay.
What does our deep dive tell us about the Czech Republic's journey toward sustainability and maybe a circular economy?
On the environmental front, the journey is still very much in progress. It's not a finished story by any means.
Right.
One key goal was to reduce landfilled biodegradable municipal waste to 35% of 1995 levels by 2020.
Okay, how did they do?
Well, while there's a waste management plan aimed at reducing landfilling, the proposed ban on landfilling mixed municipal waste that includes recyclables and recoverable stuff has actually been postponed.
Oh, from when to when?
From 2024 out to 2030.
A significant delay.
It is. At the same time, they are planning to significantly increase the landfill fee from 500 up to 1850 Czech koruna per ton by 2029.
So making it more expensive, but delaying the outright ban.
Precisely. So overall, the report concludes that the circular economy remains an ambition for the future.
Not a present reality.
Not yet. It signals that moving away from that linear take-make-dispose model is still very much a distant goal.
So a bit of a mixed bag on waste. What about energy and emissions, another huge area for any modern economy?
Here, we see some successes, but also some pretty significant hurdles.
Okay.
The Czech Republic has actually successfully met its national target for having 13% of its gross final energy consumption come from renewable energy sources, RES. They even exceeded it, reaching over 15% in 2018, so that's a clear win.
Definitely.
However, they're no closer to meeting the 10% target for RES specifically in transport.
Transport's always tricky.
It's a tough nut to crack globally, yeah. And their overall greenhouse gas emission reduction target has not been achieved.
Right. How far off were they?
Emissions in 2018 were still well above their 2020 target. And looking ahead, a critical concern is the significant increase in dependence on foreign energy imports expected after 2025.
Why is that?
Well, it's a direct consequence of increasing renewable energy sources, which often need backup.
Right. Intermittency.
Exactly. And the gradual phasing out of their conventional coal sources, it creates a really tricky energy security challenge for them moving forward.
That transition from coal certainly creates new dependencies. Okay, let's examine the state of their physical and digital infrastructure then. How well is it supporting the country's development goals?
The report paints a picture of ongoing modernization, but, well, with a lot of ground still to cover.
Especially physically.
Yes, for physical infrastructure, it shows that only 45% of rail infrastructure and 62% of roads were modernized by 2020.
So still a big infrastructure gap there.
A significant gap, yeah. On a more positive note, the development of low-emission and emission-free transport is progressing.
Like electric vehicles.
Exactly. Registered electric vehicles saw a huge leap, relatively speaking, from just 18 in 2011 to nearly 2,500 by 2018.
Okay, a big percentage increase, but from a tiny base.
Precisely. And for digital infrastructure, internet access has improved dramatically. Over 10 million declared connections in 2018, and by 2019, over 80% of households had access.
So quite connected digitally.
Yeah, while physical infrastructure lags, the digital transformation seems to be speeding ahead.
That's a clear contrast.
Yep.
What about water and soil? Crucial natural resources. that often don't get as much headline attention as energy or digital tech.
They're certainly under pressure. The report notes that measures to slow water runoff from the landscape are not systematically slowing down.
Meaning water isn't being held back effectively.
Basically, yeah, they're not effectively holding water in the environment. And even more concerning, the ecological state of water bodies has shown an alarming state for virtually all the bodies of water monitored.
Alarming. That sounds serious.
It's a stark warning about water quality, yes. And on soil, there's been zero shift in adopting a decree on protecting agricultural land against erosion.
So, not much progress protecting topsoil.
Seems that way. Now, here's a curious detail on food.
Yeah.
While the consumption of organic food in the Czech Republic increased by over 30% between 2016 and 2017.
Okay, big jump in demand.
Huge jump. But this growth is not caused by the production of Czech organic farming, but rather by imported organic products.
So they're buying more organic, but not growing more.
Exactly. Demand is rising, but domestic production isn't keeping pace. Interesting disconnect there.
That is quite a disconnect. So what does this all mean for how the Czech Republic is fostering innovation and strengthening its public administration? How effectively are they governing for the future?
It's an interesting dynamic. In research and development, R&D, and innovation, foreign-controlled firms have an increased influence.
We touched on that earlier.
Right. They actually finance 2/3 of business R&D in the manufacturing industry.
2/3, wow.
Yeah. And they invest almost twice as much in innovation as domestic businesses.
So the state wants to change that balance.
Well, the state's goal is to strengthen the links between research organizations and those crucial SMEs we talked about earlier.
Right, the smaller local firms.
Yeah, to really streamline the commercialization of research results and try to keep more of that value within the country.
And how effective is the public administration itself in driving these big changes? Are they equipped for the task?
That's a critical question, isn't it? And the report is quite direct here. The capacity for strategic work within public administration is deemed insufficient.
Insufficient, okay.
And apparently there's been no positive change since 2017. There's also a weak link between strategic planning and management of financial resources and low levels of public cooperation.
So planning isn't connected well to budgets or the public.
Seems to be the case. And despite having a huge volume of strategic documents, over 1,600 in total, with over 100 developed annually.
That's a lot of strategies.
It is, but their quality is highly volatile. They often reflect the current preferences of a particular government rather than a process of systematic efforts to achieve long-term objectives.
So more reactive than long-term vision.
That's what it suggests, yeah. A classic challenge, maybe.
That does sound like a classic challenge for many governments.
Yeah.
Let's look at digitalization in public services, though. Is this an area of stronger progress, perhaps driven by recent events?
This area definitely shows significant advancement, and you're right, recent events have played a role.
Like COVID.
Exactly. The Right to Digital Services Act came into force in February 2020, and what's really propelled things forward is that the COVID-19 outbreak accelerated matters, leading to notable progress in areas like the e-recept system for electronic prescriptions.
Oh, yeah, that's huge.
Massive convenience for citizens, yeah. And even the preparation for online founding of limited liability companies. Stuff like that.
So necessity really has been the mother of invention there.
It certainly seems so in this case. A definite bright spot.
That's a great example of how crises can sometimes spark innovation. Finally, how involved are the citizens themselves in public decision-making? Does the average person feel like they have a voice in all these changes?
The picture on citizen involvement is, well, somewhat mixed and arguably challenging.
No, so.
Voting participation in the Czech Republic has generally decreased since the early 1990s or remained relatively low in the long term.
Okay. What kind of numbers are we talking?
For instance, participation in elections to the Chamber of Deputies, the main one, has hovered around 60% for the last 20 years.
Okay, 60%.
But it often drops below 50% for other types of elections and can even be below 30% for European Parliament elections and the second round of Senate elections.
Wow, below 30%.
Yeah. So a significant portion of the population isn't regularly engaging even through the ballot box.
And other ways, beyond voting.
Well, forms of public deliberation like roundtables or consultations are quite limited, and they often involve a very similar circle of people.
The usual suspects, maybe?
Kind of suggests that, yeah. Suggesting that the perspective of beneficiaries, those directly impacted by policies, isn't broadly integrated into the policy-making process.
So a potential gap between policy and people's lived experience.
That seems to be a key takeaway, yes.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you as someone eager to be well-informed? The Czech Republic's journey towards its 2030 sustainability goals is a truly dynamic and, well, evolving story.
Definitely.
We've seen a nation making genuine strides in crucial social supports, like those family benefits, which are significant. And they're really embracing digitalization in public services, especially, it seems, when pushed. Yet they grapple with some really deep-seated structural challenges, particularly in their economic model, their fundamental approach to environmental sustainability, and critically, the capacity of their public administration to act with consistent, long-term strategic coherence.
And that interplay between the achievements and the challenges is what makes their story so compelling, I think.
Yeah.
You now have a much clearer, hopefully more nuanced understanding of a country that's undeniably striving for progress, but facing the real complexities of balancing economic realities with these incredibly ambitious social and environmental targets.
It's never a straight line, is it?
Progress is rarely linear, no.
So a final thought for you, our listener, to maybe mull over. Given the existing low public trust in state institutions and those stable yet relatively low voter participation rates, what might be the transformative impact if citizen engagement in policymaking truly deepened beyond its current, somewhat limited forms? How could your active involvement, or the collective involvement of citizens, really contribute to accelerating solutions for the Czech Republic's complex sustainability challenges?
It's a powerful question for any nation, really.
It is.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this has given you a richer, more nuanced understanding of the Czech Republic's path to 2030.